Hey guys, what's up? So there are a lot of JRPGs that when you go and play them for the first time, you have expectations, right? And sometimes they turn out to be great, and sometimes they turn out to be bad. They either disappoint you or, they meet your expectations. But there are other JRPGs that something tells you you're not gonna like them. You watch the gameplay, you watch a trailer, you watch the review, and you're like, man, I'm not gonna like this game, it's gonna be bad. No way. But for some reason, out of curiosity maybe, you play them and they blow you away. That's right, they surpassed your expectations, sometimes by far, and you end up becoming a fan of these games. So today, I'm going to tell you about 10 JRPGs that far surpassed my expectations. So let's begin. Before we start, I want to show you all these JRPGs that also surpassed my expectations. Didn't want today's list to be full of the usual suspects I've covered to death, but I thought they still deserve to be shown. Anyway, my personal stories with most of these games aren't that interesting, so let's just keep going on the top 10. Number 10. Parasite Eve. When I was 20 years old, I got addicted to both RPGs and survival horror games. I found Parasite Eve 2 in a flea market, so I bought it. I noticed the RPG elements, but it just didn't feel like an RPG, it was more of a survival horror game. Fine by me, I was still very excited. I noticed it was a direct sequel, but I never found the first one anywhere, not until many years later at least, so I didn't understand much story-wise. Gameplay also disappointed me, clunky controls, confusing battle system, and nasty difficulty spikes. I didn't like this game, so I got rid of it. Can you imagine what my expectations were for the first Parasite Eve? Yeah, the lowest, despite people telling me it was much better. Still, I ignored my prejudice and played a bootleg copy of it. It was alright. Disc 2 never worked, so I gave it up and forgot about it. Several years later, I got an original mint condition copy of it while I was still in Canada. I streamed it and I liked it way more than before, so I kept playing it on my own until I beat it. Very short game, around 10 hours long actually. It is a role-playing game per se, just not a conventional one, but it's a freaking masterpiece! Amazing writing and characters, fantastic graphics, beautiful cinematics for its time, and a very unique battle system. I really enjoyed everything about this game except maybe for how slow Aya runs, but it's okay. So my advice is to never judge a game just because you didn't like the sequel, I guess. Number 9. Shin Megami Tensei Devil Summoner Soul Hackers. Now that you understand better the concept of this video, let's talk about dungeon crawlers in first person. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you've already realized I'm not really into them, despite recommending them often in certain videos. They're good games, just not for me. I honestly thought then Soul Hackers was going to bore me, cause it was just like that. But I underestimated the fact that it was a Shin Megami Tensei game. And what I love about that series is not only the kick-ass soundtrack, but also the adult-oriented plots and the demon fusion and negotiating programs. Soul Hackers not only had all of that, but also a very interesting story and a very charming heroine, Nemissa. She's the only character that joins your silent protagonist in battle, besides the demons of course. However, Soul Hackers doesn't have the classic press turn system. Instead, you select the actions of every party member first and pretty much hope for the best when you start the battle. By knowing the enemy's weaknesses and stats, you can build up a decent party and create good strategies, which is exactly what the game wants you to do. Navigation in first person with random encounters, it's something I don't like, but because everything else was awesome, I didn't mind it in this game. Overall, when I reached the end, I was surprised on how much I had enjoyed it, especially after having played it with the lowest expectations you can imagine. I was even planning on selling it before playing it, thank goodness I didn't. Number 8. Persona 5 Strikers. It seems nowadays Omega Force needs to give every single popular JRPG franchise its own Warriors game. Atlus, however, wanted an action RPG, which is exactly what happened with Persona 5 Scramble, also known as Strikers. However, I didn't know any of that, and when I saw the announcement for this game, I didn't care that much. Another Warriors game based on a JRPG, whatever. So for a long time, I ignored it despite some of you telling me it was awesome. I still didn't want to buy it and eventually lost all interest. So then, a fan sent the Switch version to me. After I got it, I streamed it, and if you were there, you probably noticed that I still wasn't too excited about it after the first 2 hours. Yep, it went back to the shelf until, out of mere curiosity, I put it back on the Switch one day. That very same day was when I noticed this was way more than a Warriors game. It was a full-fledged action RPG, going from town to town, talking to people, reading tons of dialogue, leveling up, grinding, buying items, fusing personas, etc. And not only that, it was a canon direct sequel to the original Persona 5, just without the royal events. Wow, it didn't have the best controls at first, but I got used to them. It's just Atlus and Omega Force wanted the players to focus the fighting on the Persona summoning skills instead of just mindlessly brawling. Well, after I beat the game, I put it back on the shelf with a big smile on my face. Loved it, but I think it's more surprising to know that it runs very well on the Switch. Number 7. Final Fantasy VII Remake. I believe most of you thought this game will be here. It's true that when I first watched the trailers and found out it wasn't going to be turn-based, I was disappointed. It's true that when I played the demo, my first impressions were very mixed. I was convinced that I wasn't going to like it at all, so I ignored it for a long time, stopped searching for new or used copies of it and gave it up. Yep, that's how disapproving I was with a cynical lack of interest. A couple of months ago I found a PS4 copy for cheap and I said, why not? But I even gave priority to other JRPGs I got the same day. So when I finally installed the 100 GB on my PS4 and started the game, I realized the gameplay was a little bit more balanced than the one in the demo. I don't know if that's a fact, it's just how I felt it. So I kept playing it for a while until I noticed several hours had elapsed. The game had manipulated me entirely, not letting me go. Therefore, I also noticed how good it was in some areas, how wrong I was for ignoring it for this long. Is it a masterpiece? Nah, it has some flaws that almost made me turn the game off sometimes. If you watched my review of it, you probably remember all my complaints, but something made me addicted to it until I beat it. The game's short if you don't do side quests, which I honestly didn't really care for in this playthrough, so I beat the game in less than a week, but because I was playing it for several hours each day. Yeah, that's how much I was enjoying it. Number 6. God Eater 1 and 2. I hated the first God Eater on the PSP. Yeah, God's Eater Burst it was called over here. I thought the controls were terrible, the story was uninteresting and the gameplay was repetitive, very repetitive. Difficulty spikes also turned me off. So I realized these God Eater games just weren't for me at all, especially since they were very much like Monster Hunter. Those games had also turned me off after a few tries. Years later I watched the anime, it was magnificent, I greatly enjoyed it, but it wasn't enough to pay attention to the games. Ever wonder why I've barely covered this series before? That's because I picked up God Eater 2 and 3 a couple of months ago, and because I paid money for them, I needed to at least test them. Through this though, I had already played the remake of God's Eater Burst, now called God Eater Resurrection, on the PS4. I recommended it a few times in some videos. I thought the remake was far superior to the original game, but after 2 hours, just really couldn't get into it. Many years later, that is merely a couple of weeks ago, I started playing God Eater 2, and I just cannot explain why I really got into it this time. Several hours later I realized I had unconsciously become a God Eater fan, so I went back to Resurrection cause you do need to play at least the first 2 games in order. I'm still loving it. Maybe it's because it has much better graphics and controls than the original, but I also think it's because, unlike Monster Hunter, these games have a strong focus on the story and characters, strong development with everyone just trying to survive in the brutally harsh conditions they live in. Plus, I'm a sucker for post-apocalyptic stories, so yeah. They hooked me up and surpassed my really low, uncaring expectations for them. Can't speak highly of the third game yet since I've barely played it, but the first two I gotta recommend them. They're also on the Vita and PC. Number 5. Ys 7. I want to tell you guys how I got into the Ys series. When I started playing RPG after RPG back in my 20s, the truth is I didn't like action RPGs with only one playable character. Every time I noticed one of them was like that, I would immediately ignore it. So the first Ys I ever played was Ys 6 on the PS2. Because you can only play as Adol, I got bored pretty quickly and got rid of it. Then I played Ys 3 on the Super Nintendo, didn't care for that one either. It wasn't until I got a hacked PSP when I started playing RPGs on there non-stop for a period of time. I downloaded Ys 7 just out of curiosity because I noticed you had party members this time. I thought for sure though that I wasn't going to like it either way, but I was wrong. The fact that you had allies fighting by your side, and not only that, you could also switch to them and control them, it just amazed me. You could do that by clicking one button. In other games, you had to get out of battle, open the menu and select another character. Not in Ys 7, and that hooked me up in an instant. So, this game is one of the many adventures of adult Christian, and it was the last one chronologically speaking before Ys 9 came about. That's right, Ys 8 precedes this one in terms of timeline, but it was the very first Ys game ever released to include party members and or other playable characters. So of course it surpassed my expectations, and of course it turned me into a friggin' Ys fanboy. And yes, I started appreciating action RPGs with only one character. Number 4. Brigandine, The Legend of Runercia. I liked the first game on the PS1, but, well, actually not really. I don't dislike it, but I just couldn't get into it. Very convoluted, lacking tutorials. When I first played it, I thought it was a big mess. Still a strategy RPG I recommend every once in a while, but I just wasn't a big fan. It's no surprise then that when I heard a second game was being released on the PS4 and Switch a couple of years ago, I had zero interest. I'll confess that I downloaded the demo and never even touched it until last year when I did a Switch Hidden Gems video. I then streamed it some weeks ago. So can you imagine my expectations? Sure, it was a hidden gem, but at the same time, it just wasn't for me. The demo was fine, it caught my attention, it had better tutorials, a more well-rounded explanation on how to play the game. I was now interested, but still kept my expectations to a minimum. When I finally played it, I tried different prologues just to see which character appealed to me the most. The next day I woke up and hurried to keep playing it. That's how much I enjoyed it the first time. Slowly, it trapped me with the story and with the addictive gameplay mechanics. I covered this masterpiece again on my PS4 Hidden Gems video, and I even explained it much better. Basically, you choose between 6 different protagonists, each fighting in a war to conquer Runercia for their own reasons, so obviously you start a campaign to do that by sending commanders to defend your different bases or to attack the enemy bases. Commanders can have a bunch of monsters that you can summon as long as you have enough mana. In battle, you move around on grids, but you can only take up to 3 commanders and they're assigned monsters with you. The goal is to have the enemy commander retreat or to defeat them. Upon occupying every single enemy base, you'll conquer their land. So it sounds pretty simple, but it is slightly complex, although not really if you learn the basics, which is exactly what I did in order to fully enjoy my surprisingly unexpected journey. Number 3. Xenoblade Chronicles. To be honest, the original game on the Wii never impressed me. Everybody I knew told me what a great masterpiece it was, but when I played it, I didn't love it. I liked it, sure, it was alright, but I just didn't see its greatness. Of course, I never got past Sword, one of the first major bosses in the game. For the longest time, even long after years of making videos here on YouTube, I still wasn't a fan. I developed a reputation of being one of the very few YouTubers who didn't love Xenoblade Chronicles, so when the definitive edition was released, I took notice, but not that much. Time went on, and less than 2 years ago a fan sent the game to me. I streamed it and I liked it. My opinion improved a little, but still didn't give a damn. But about a year ago, I decided to go back to it because I got tired of most of your comments. You convinced me to continue playing it, and therefore I did. Thank goodness I listened to you guys, cause this definitive edition blew me away and absolutely surpassed my really low and pessimistic expectations of it. Today, I still believe has some small issues like the HP spongy enemies and the long ass dungeons or ruins, but none of that was now an obstacle for me to truly enjoy and appreciate this excellent JRPG. Number 2, Lost Odyssey. Back when I had a retro store, I had an Xbox 360 on sale. Since no one seemed interested in buying it, I took it home with a few games, but mostly because I had an original copy of Lost Odyssey. I knew it was Sakaguchi's brand new RPG after he had left Square Enix, but that's all. I had no expectations when I first played it. I remember everything looked great, even the battle system. The story even hooked me up right from the start. But then I got to this goddamn son of a bitch, and he destroyed my party 3 times in a row. And that's pretty much the first real boss of the game. So I said, screw this trash, it sucks. Took the game out, put it back on its case, and the next day I returned both the game and the console to my store. Eventually they sold and that was it. I didn't see Lost Odyssey again until much later when I found a few copies of it in Blockbuster for $5 each, mint condition, complete in box. Absolutely, I took 3 of them, put 2 for sale and kept 1 for myself. I went home, put it on a 360 that was now mine, and gave it a second chance. All I did was level up this time and change my strategy for that boss fight and beat it on my first try. I couldn't believe it, and I also couldn't believe several hours later how much I was loving this masterpiece. To date, it's still my favorite 360 JRPG ever and one of the best stories ever written in one. I'm so glad I went back to this game one more time because it easily surpassed my expectations. So as you can see, most of the games in this video have been me loving them after a second chance, and speaking about second chances, we ain't done yet. Number 1, Valkyrie Profile 2, Silmeria. Let me tell you how I got to love these games so much. Some of you already know the story if you've been fans for a while, but I'm pretty sure some of you don't. When I first bought my PlayStation 2, it was hacked, and they let me choose 10 bootleg copies for free. I was already a fan of JRPGs, so I mostly picked JRPGs and a few survival horror games. Well, Valkyrie 2 was one of them, even though I had never played the first one. So I went in completely blind, not knowing anything about the original. Graphics and music immediately blew me away. I also found the first characters interesting, but I absolutely hated the battle system. After a couple of hours I realized I couldn't understand it, I didn't enjoy it, and therefore I ditched the game for a long time. One day I had nothing, absolutely nothing else to play, nothing at all. So I looked at this game and said, alright, let's give it one more chance before I get rid of it. Obviously I went with the lowest expectations possible. I don't know what happened that I paid proper attention this time to the combat and spent some time training in an area to understand it better. Once I got it, I learned a few tips and tricks on my own and I started to appreciate the battle system more and more and more until I ended up completely addicted to it. I loved the story, the characters, and especially the combat. It quickly became my favorite RPG on the PS2 and today it still is. It's one of those very few RPGs where I've done absolutely everything there is to be done. Yes, even the secret dungeon, and I've beaten that secret dungeon multiple times. I'm still in love with this masterpiece, and I'm always happy to remember how it completely surpassed my expectations after a second chance. So those are my picks for today's video, 10 JRPGs that I thought were gonna be bad, that I thought I wasn't going to like, and I ended up loving. They far surpassed my expectations. What are yours? Let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends. See you next time!